Let me first introduce you. We have now the CEO of Sorghum Limited, Native Bloom, and he will be going to talk on something about millets and how it is, redefining its goal and opportunity in food and agriculture, especially in the food security, nutrition, environment, and smallholder farmers. So, welcome, Native Bloom, for this conference and for your presentation. Yeah, over to you.
Well, great. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. And excuse me. I think that the work that is being done, not only at this conference, but around the world in the International Year of the Millet, is of incredible importance. So my name is Nate Bloom. I'm the CEO of Sorghum United. You can see here on your screen. You can see my slides, right? Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So Sorghum United is a NGO. We have about 50 members on every continent except for Antarctica. And we're all united around the concept of creating markets development and education for sorghum and millets, in addition to standing up regional food and entrepreneurial hubs. And we'll talk a little bit about that and why this is so important. So I want to start out by talking about a bit of history here. This is David Fairchild, and most folks in the U.S. don't know who David Fairchild is or was, and most folks around the world, I suspect, are about the same. But about 100 years ago, David Fairchild grew up in Kansas, which is just south of Nebraska, where I live. And he grew up in a farming community, and he realized that the monocropping systems really weren't beneficial to farmers. And so he set off on a mission. His ends up being his life work, actually, to go around the world and introduce new plant species to North America. In particular, we have David Fairchild to thank for avocados in California, mangoes in Florida, as well as excuse me, as well as the Japanese cherry blossoms in Washington, D.C. It's a fantastic book. If you get a chance to read The Food Explorer, I highly recommend it. One thing that will stand out to you is that the problems of David Fairchild's day in regard to agriculture are still the same problems that we're dealing with now. There's one section in particular that has a quote from a farmer in Illinois, and she's quoted as saying, quote, the corn industry, I'll paraphrase this, the corn industry told us to grow as much corn as we possibly could this year. And what did we get for it? Everybody grew as much as they could, and the price went down, and nobody made any profit. And I think that that's really an issue that we still deal with today, quite frankly, and illustrates the point really well. So this is why this work is important. So let's talk about the modern commodity marketing model. Now, I'll start off by saying that the commodity marketing model is important. It's what provides us inexpensive food and allows farmers in the United States to feed much of the world. And yes, that's of course done with sorghum as well as corn and wheat and beans and you name it, right? So that's important and it shouldn't go away. The problem with the commodity marketing model, though, is that it really emphasizes volume over value. And what I mean by that is, in order to be competitive in a commodity marketing model in which you cannot control your price, you have to grow as much as you possibly can. Well, guess what? Your neighbor's going to do the same thing. And just like that farmer in Illinois 100 years ago, our farmers are going to harvest their crop at about the same time regionally, and they're going to take it to the local grain elevator. And the more supply you have on the market, the lower the demand becomes, and that's reflected in the price. As a result of this, we've seen massive farm consolidation here in the United States. It's not possible for small farmers in the U.S. To really make it if they're not supplementing their operations with some other opportunities, diversified cropping in particular. So the other part of the commodity marketing model that is incredibly fragile, and this will be especially true in sorghum, is the overdependence on singular customers. Now, what I mean by that is China buys 80% of the world's supply of sorghum. 93% of the U.S. sorghum goes to China. That's great when China's buying, but when they're not buying, we have a big problem. I don't know too many entrepreneurs or business people who would be happy with their business model being so dependent upon one customer, 80% of their sales to one customer. That's an incredible problem. Recently, maybe just a few years ago, there was a statistic that was thrown out in regard to soybeans, and that was that every fourth row of soybeans in a field goes to China. And again, that's fantastic when they're buying, but when they're not buying, it's a problem. So needing to find new ways to create diversified opportunities, not only in cropping systems, but also economically for farmers is absolutely important. And then everybody wants to talk about carbon sequestration and our carbon footprint. One thing that doesn't get talked about a lot when we talk about this is the carbon footprint of transoceanic shipping. Those ships that send goods both ways have a much higher carbon footprint than anything else on the planet. And if we can decrease, not to decrease trade, but if we can do this in a smarter way, maybe that provides more value, there will be some more benefits to having that as an offset. So how do we supplement value-based market or supplement the commodity market model with value-based markets, I should say? Well, first of all, I'd say it's not a zero-sum game. There are organizations, my former organization, I was the director of the Nebraska Grain Sorghum Board, and commodity groups like that really are focused on filling boats for international trade. And that's important. But I would say that developing regional value-based products for consumer markets based in sorghum and millets does not diminish our ability to fill boats. Now, why is that? Well, it's because the more value you bring to a crop, the more farmers will grow it. We actually, in the last 2 years alone in Nebraska, we saw a 100% increase, or rather a 99% increase in our sorghum acres in the state. And that is largely due to markets development and markets value for the grain. So it's definitely not a zero-sum game. We can fill boats and we can fill grocery baskets at the same time. Being able to have value-added processing proximate to the production of grain, which is really what we're talking about here, also allows farmers to mitigate that commodity market volatility. It allows them to have another strategy, another tactic to mitigate the risk of a market that they can't control. So if in my cropping system I want to grow corn and soybeans and wheat and sell those as commodities, that's great. But maybe every fourth year I plant that field into sorghum or millets, and because I've got processing down the road from me, I can direct contract that. So I can go to that processor, whether they're making cookies or snack foods or baking mixes. And I can go to that processor and I can say, well, what variety do you need and how much do you need? And that way, now I'm planting with a little more intelligence on my side. And I can mitigate some of that market risk that's going to happen in my other crops. So that's really important. And of course, that encourages the diversified cropping systems. In eastern Nebraska, where I live, the rotation is often corn on beans, and that's the rotation. And there are benefits to soil health that we'll talk about here in a little while, as well as biodiversity, carbon sequestration, and water conservation from having other crops in those systems. This model, by the way, where we're placing value-added processing proximate to the production of the grains, creates new opportunities, not just for large farmers here in the U.S., but also for medium and smallholder farmers. And this would be true around the world. Part of the mission of Sorghum United is to stand up some of these entrepreneurial and food hubs around the world, not to give people a solution, but to give them opportunities for them to find their own solutions using these crops. For the processor, having the processing close to the production of the grain means that you decrease your logistics and lowers your carbon footprint. I'll show you a map here in a little while, but Nebraska is a really good example of this. Nebraska is the only state in North America that is quintuply landlocked. meaning that you have to go through 5 other states to get to a coast. And so that's a problem for our farmers in regard to shipping internationally, but it's an opportunity in accessing the North American market because we are the central point in the continent. So it takes about 2.5 days by truck to get anywhere in the U.S. And that's an incredible benefit to processors who maybe potentially want to look at a central location to access the U.S. market. All right. Oh, and let's again talk about what this does for consumer diets. And I have another graphic I'll show here in a couple of slides. But we're really good at feeding the world, but we're not always really good at feeding the world nutritious foods, right? So increasing sorghum in consumer diets can not only help benefit from a standpoint of alleviating hunger, but also providing a nutrient-rich option for our consumers as well. And let's talk about those markets opportunities, by the way. So you see this slide here. This was a poster that we had prepared for a conference in France just a couple of years ago through Sorghum ID. So the data is from 2019, but I think it's still pertinent. If you look at the global value for some of the attributes of sorghum and millets, it's incredibly high. So that CAGR, C-A-G-R, means compound annual growth rate. So as of 2019, the value for functional foods, or nutraceuticals we call them, was $173.2 billion with an annual compounded growth rate of 77%. And I'm not going to read all of these off to you, but you get the idea. I mean, whether it's non-GMO, gluten-free, or sustainable, there's value in all of these. And let's talk about the GMO for a second. Okay, of course, sorghum and millets are non-GMO crops, and depending on where how you feel about this, GMOs are either good or they're bad. And the reality is that all the research that we've seen around the world in the last 15 years or more has shown that GMO crops are actually safe. But what matters is your consumer's perspective. So if you have a consumer that wants a non-GMO crop, rather than telling them why they're wrong and trying to argue with them, I say let's just sell it to them. And this is something that farmers need to think about a little bit differently. And this is not only true in the GMO space, but when we're talking about thinking about our customers, right? They don't always have to be right. So we want to try to educate. We want to provide information. Of course, we want to show what farming is actually like, and maybe dispel some myths. But at the same time, if you have customers that want a product and you have that product, that's a market opportunity for you. So rather than approaching the customer in a way that might be argumentative, finding ways to work with them to give them what they want is absolutely important. When we're talking about sustainability, we're not just talking about water, wildlife, and soil health. We're also talking about economic sustainability, and this is incredibly important, not just here in the U.S., but again for farmers across the world. So let's start talking about some of the climate impacts of sorghum. This is a really cool graphic that came from one of our research institutions here in Nebraska. So this is the water usage of sorghum in a rotation, and you'll see that the cover crops, I don't know what those cover crops were, but they took water out of the soil, and then you've got sorghum here, and the water actually increases, and then you have another cover crop, and it's taking more water out of the soil, and then you have sorghum again, and there again the water level actually increases. This is the importance of planting a crop that uses about 1/3 of the water of other crops in your rotation, in regard to water conservation in particular. It's drought resistant as well, as many of your viewers already know. Sorghum and millets are drought resistant. They have more than one pollination cycle. So while drought will certainly affect your yield, you'll still get a yield off of it. In Southwest Nebraska in 2022, we had a terrible drought. It didn't rain drop from planting until harvest. And as you can imagine, it was all very bleak and miserable. But when we looked at the sorghum, while the yields were very low. They were between 30 and 50 bushels per acre, when normally we'd be expecting closer to 200 or 150 bushels per acre. They were still able to get some yield off of it. So as parts of the globe are looking at increased climate challenges, and I think about the Mediterranean basin in particular, we need to be helping the producers and the consumers understand the importance of other crops that can be used for human goods regions, rather than continuing to promote things like corn in Syria. In fact, I was in not Syria, but in Jordan rather. I was in Jordan last year, about a year ago, actually, from today. And they're drilling wells in Jordan 4,000 feet deep. That's incredibly deep. And at the same time, the USAID offices there in Jordan are trying to help them to grow corn in the desert. And this just doesn't make sense. We need to be looking at other crops for those regions. From a standpoint of carbon sequestration, we mentioned carbon earlier with the shipping. Data from Texas A&M University that was released just this last year, and you can Google it. I'm sorry I don't have a link up here for it. Actually showed that because of sorghum's large root biomass that goes down about 6 feet into the soil, that it is one of the ideal crops for carbon capture and carbon sequestration in the soil. So the more sorghum we have in the fields, the more carbon we're taking out of the air. What that also means for soil health is that there's that root biomass leaves more biology in the soil, but it also does something else that's pretty amazing. One of the biggest challenges for agriculture around the world is something called the compaction layer. Anywhere you go in the world, there's a layer of soil that's been compacted, and that diminishes the ability of your other crops like corn or soybeans or wheat to access water because their root systems aren't strong enough to penetrate that. Sorghum actually breaks up that compaction layer. And so what we find, and this is from data from Kansas State University, it's a few years old now. What we find is that if you plant sorghum in rotation with your other crops, you'll see an average of an 8% increase in your yield the following year in your next cropping system. So that's incredibly important. And then from a wildlife habitat standpoint, when I grew up on the farm here in eastern Nebraska, we had a lot of sorghum all over. And as a result, game birds, pheasants, quail, things like that, well, you couldn't throw a rock without hitting a bird. And now, as in the last 30 years, as corn and soybeans have become more prevalent in this part of the state, it's actually very difficult to find some of those wild game birds. In fact, a lot of folks I know in South America, even we have some friends down there, they'll grow sorghum not to harvest it at all, but just to do dove hunts, and it becomes an agricultural tourism opportunity. So there's a lot of opportunities to having sorghum in your rotation that go beyond just the crop itself, as well as the environmental benefits. So let's get back to the human impacts of sorghum and millets. And I love this chart. This came from our friends down at the United Sorghum Checkoff Program in Texas. But this is a comparison of nutrients and health benefits of sorghum as compared to other crops. And you'll see over here, the thing I like to point out, not to pick on any one crop, but look at the comparison between sorghum and rice. Now, why is this important? It's important because sorghum, if you cook it as a whole grain or even as a pearled grain, is a great substitute for rice. Not to say that you should never have rice, but it's an opportunity. You use it just like rice, and you can supplement some other meals with that. I mentioned the Middle East earlier when I was in Jordan. I was also in the UAE at the Emirates. And what I learned while in my time over there was that because of the dependence of rice on the diet in the Middle East, there's actually an epidemic of diabetes in those regions. And you can see, just not only looking at, I don't think the sugar content's on here, but you can see how many benefits from a nutrition standpoint that population would have by supplementing sorghum with their rice in their diet. And again, this goes into dealing with hunger and malnutrition. as well. So I mentioned diabetes. Well, one benefit of sorghum and millets is that they are low on the glycemic index. Now that means that they're lower in sugars, and if you're diabetic, having that in your diet can help you to manage your condition. But it also means that it digests slower. And if I'm a hungry person, if I live in an area that's impoverished and I don't have a lot of great access to food, I'm going to want to eat food that's going to make me feel fuller longer, in addition to having the nutritional benefits. And so sorghum makes a lot of sense in those regions. In those regions, by the way, where there are economic challenges, many of those regions are ones in which sorghum and millets are grown by smallholder farmers. Now, if we can increase the value of their crop through the creation of nutritious food products for those regions, but then we can also increase the economic opportunities for those farmers as well. And this again goes to one of the core missions of Sorghum United, which is to help stand up these entrepreneurial and food hubs. We believe that when sorghum and millets increase in value, and when those crops do better, opportunities for these farmers increase as well. Go on to the next one. Let's talk about some research. This is really exciting, actually. In the last several years, uh, there's been a ton of research that's come out on the benefits of sorghum in human diets. And I won't click on these links, but they are available in the slides, and you can also Google them. But here in Nebraska alone, we have an institution called the Food for Health Center. And the Food for Health Center is one of 6 institutions in the entire world that studies the gut microbiome. And after 6 plus years of research, they finally have 2 different papers that have now been published in the journal Science and Nature, I believe, on the impacts of sorghum in rebalancing the human gut microbiome. Basically, the human gut microbiome is a collection of microorganisms that live in all of our guts, and they help us to digest our food. They help us to be healthy. When they're happy, we're happy, essentially. And so what they're finding is that through rebalancing this gut microbiome, we can see uh, decreased symptoms in several conditions that we'll talk about here in just a little while. Additional research was commissioned by the United Sorghum Checkoff Program here in the U.S. Last year, and what they did was they paid a researcher named Dr. James Painter and his colleague Maggie McGinnis to do a meta-analysis of over 200 published research papers from around the world, and to collect that data and just basically see what it says. What are the researchers saying? So they didn't do the research; they researched the research. And what they found was that all of these papers that have been published, again, over 200 of them internationally, have really all confirmed the same things in that their health benefits that are derived from the polyphenols and tannins in sorghum. Now, in North America, North American sorghum has most of the tannins have been bred out, but what they're finding is the polyphenols actually are even more beneficial than the tannins. And you're seeing things like heart health, anti-diabetic traits that we talked about, and even anti-carcinogenic, so anti-cancer properties from having sorghum in your diet. We can also talk about inflammatory disease, and that's one I didn't put up on the slide here, but that's maybe one of the greatest benefits of sorghum, is that they've shown decreases in inflammatory bowel disease symptoms, as well as arthritis and other inflammatory diseases. And this all happens because that gut microbiome is rebalanced, and because you're getting those more nutritious polyphenols and things like that in your diet as well. I'd like to give a special shout out, by the way, to Dr. Galabrini and his team at the Catholic University in Rome, because they actually have done some human trials comparing sorghum in patients in a hospital setting with patients who had pasta that was, I want to say they used pasta. So some of the patients had pasta that was made with sorghum, and some of the patients had just regular wheat pasta. And they were able to confirm, actually, in a small sample study, these same benefits. So they've done great work, and I'm excited to continue to work with Dr. Galabrini and his team. Sorghum and millets, though we've been talking about eating sorghum and millets, but there's a ton of other benefits to having sorghum actually and millets, and those are found in the industrial space. So we talk about food, fuel, and fiber. A large amount of sorghum in the United States is actually used to produce ethanol, and it produces ethanol just about almost at the same yield as corn does. In fact, many of these plants will commingle corn and sorghum together. You get a little less of the oil byproduct, but you can create DDGs that come from the distiller's grains that come from all creation process. And what we found is when you're feeding those DDGs to livestock, that they are just as good as corn DDGs. So that's an exciting application for sorghum. There are other applications. There's a company in Texas called Millets. They make blow-in insulation for homes and businesses out of sorghum. Basically, what they're doing is they're extruding the whole grain. It comes out of the extruder kind of as a puff, almost like a Cheeto, if you know what a Cheeto is. And then they add some borax onto it so that it's flame retardant and nothing will eat it. And then they just blow it directly into the homes. The benefit of that is, of course, it's biodegradable. So if the storm goes through and blows your roof off, and you've got this insulation all over the ground, it actually will dissolve. So that's one benefit. Another benefit is that it retains its R factor. The R factor is I'm not a I'm not an insulator, so bear with me when I say this. But the R factor is basically what preserves your insulation. So in your insulation's ability to retain heat and things like that is what I should say. So when you're using another type of insulation, blow-in insulation that is made out of a different material, it will settle over time and you'll lose that R factor. Well, with the Millets product, the R factor is actually trapped within those extruded puffs. And so once it's applied, it never needs to be reapplied, which is pretty astounding. There's another company here in Nebraska that is making carbon fiber out of grain sorghum. If you're not familiar with carbon fiber, it's an incredibly light and durable material. It's a lot of applications, not only in the transportation industry, airplanes, cars, things like that, but also your laptop and your phone and things like that. Traditionally, carbon fiber is made out of petroleum products. The gentleman who's working on this, his name is Dr. Bai Tweed. And what he tells us is he can make a pound of carbon fiber using grain sorghum for about 37 cents a pound. If he's making that same pound of carbon fiber using a petroleum product, it costs him about $2.37 per pound. So you've significantly decreased the cost of carbon fiber while at the same time, using a sustainable product and regenerative product to create that same carbon fiber. Dr. Twee is in the process of scaling up his business now. It's called Chrome Materials. I'm not sure if they have a website, but it's really remarkable work. Sorghum stalks can also be pressed and used to make temporary building materials. The Ag Research Service station out of Peoria, Illinois, the ARS is what it's called, ARS. ARS is part of the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture. They have research stations across the country, and I believe actually other countries as well. But that one in particular in Peoria, Illinois, has learned how to make temporary building materials out of sorghum stalks. So this is incredible opportunities for think about disaster relief or even just regenerative home building that can come from grain sorghum. So we've talked about some of the research in regard to health. We've talked about some of the research in regard to industrial applications. And of course, there are more, everything from bioplastics to you name it. Anything you can do with any other grain or any other stock, you can do with grain sorghum and forage sorghum for that matter. And that brings us to the International Year of Millets here in 2023. You'll see the Sorgo Squad poster there. This is rather an advertising campaign that our Sorghum United group came up with. as you might know, sorghum is called different things in different parts of the world. And what our group wanted to do was to create uniform but localizable imaging that would convey the message that these are all the same crops or different varieties within the same family, even. So you've got the three characters there. The young character is his name is Milo. Milo is the common nomenclature for sorghum in North America, and he represents the environmental benefits of sorghum. And then you have the blonde character. Her name is Mashila. Mashila is the common nomenclature in Northern Africa and Ethiopia for sorghum. And she represents the human benefits and animal benefits nutrition standpoint, uh, and for food security as well. And then you have Jowar. Jowar, of course, is the common nomenclature in India. And Jowar represents the industrial benefits of sorghum. We have a series of 10 of these posters, and they're available on our website at sorghumunited.com. We hope that people will take those and distribute them. We actually were able to have them be a part of the opening ceremony at the International Year of Millets at the United Nations FAO in Rome back in December. In fact, I was able to attend that with several of my colleagues as well. That was a great event, and we're really glad that the United Nations has picked those up as well. We will have more materials using the Sorgo Squad here later on in this year. We're actually working on a children's book series. There will be 4 books initially that'll be published around the beginning of June, and we'd like those to be available for purchase around the world. One of the biggest challenges in sorghum and millets, and many of your viewers probably know this already, is a simple lack of consumer awareness. These grains have not been top of mind for a generation or more in much of the world. And so the Sorgo Squad is an opportunity to help tell our story, not only to young people, but also to young families that are looking for nutritious options. And we think it can be a key piece in growing value-added markets, both here in the US as well as around the world for these crops. So I mentioned I was going to show you a map earlier about these regional value chains, and this is something again that we're really putting a focus on at Sorghum United. And that is finding areas like Nebraska that are geographically central and are also very fertile in regard to being able to grow grains like sorghum and millets. And whether that's in Africa or Southeast Asia or here in the United States, I think the mission remains the same, and that is to go and do producer and consumer education. We're planning some trips actually where we'll bring a nutritionist and a chef as well as an agronomist along, just to do some education over the course of a couple of days. And then also to help set up these entrepreneurial hubs, whether that's working with a local university or a local business, so that you can have food entrepreneurs or carbon fiber entrepreneurs or industrial application entrepreneurs to provide them with a space and direction so that they can not only create new products using these grains, but also increase the economic prosperity for themselves and their communities as well. So, not to go in and give them a solution, but to give people the tools from which they can find their own solutions. I think that kind of empowerment is where we see real change. I would say that if any of your viewers would like to have a conversation with us about working together in your area to accomplish these goals, shoot me an email, and you'll see my email later on here in the slide. I'll have that up for you. So some policy recommendations, and I love this picture here. This picture came from Europe this last year, and it's a farmer who planted wheat and a farmer who planted grain sorghum. And these pictures were taken on the same day, in different fields. And because of the drought that they had, you can see that the wheat field is completely devastated. There's nothing came up, it didn't grow. But the sorghum field, just a few miles away, actually looks pretty good. And so as we talk about policy recommendations around what we call climate smart agriculture or regenerative agriculture, we highly encourage our elected officials to consider more investment in research and development for these grains. We also need to invest in producer resources. Farmers haven't grown sorghum or millets in a generation or more, or maybe ever. They need to understand how to do it. There are some great resources, for example, again, out of the United Sorghum Checkoff Program, um, show actual planting and field guides, cropping guides, everything from planting to harvesting, based on different climates and regions. And those are available as PDFs on their website. But I think that more of those resources for producers need to be tailored to different areas around the globe as well. Uh, Investment in consumer education and markets development. Now that's key, and it's always just kind of a chicken and the egg, right? You want more farmers to grow sorghum or use sorghum and millets in their rotation, but if they don't have markets for it, then they're not going to grow it because they can't sell it, right? And so at the same time that we invest in increasing producers' knowledge for sorghum and millets, we also have to invest in that consumer education and markets development. Again, not just for big boats going to China, but for regional food products and other products that can go into value-added markets here at home, wherever home happens to be. There is significant investment in the quantification of environmental impacts for cereal grains right now. I know there are several large grants that have been issued by the United States Department of Agriculture on quantifying what climate smart actually means. So I talked earlier about sorghum's carbon sequestration ability, but what does that actually look like in terms of numbers, that sort of thing? We know that sorghum and millets use about a third of the water of other crops, but that's what are the actual numbers, right? How do we quantify that in a way that tells our story to people that are interested in having products that are maybe more sustainable and make them feel like they're doing their part in combating climate change. Producer incentives for multi-cropping systems. And this slide, by the way, I should say, came from a presentation I gave to US and Australian negotiators at the first round of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework discussions in Brisbane, Australia last month. And I highly encourage those member nations in the IPEF to invest in these things so that their farmers have more opportunities to diversify not only their cropping systems but also their economic opportunities. And then, of course, entrepreneurial incentives for product development and startup businesses. We need to see more of those entrepreneurial small business hubs. We have some here in Nebraska, for example, but they really focus mostly on agri-tech. And we need more around food in particular. And we have some of that too, but we need to develop it further. And again, not just here, but in other regions of the world. So with that, you're welcome to. I don't see a lot of people actually on the call live here, at least not on my screen. But if people are able to ask questions, I would be glad to entertain those. Otherwise, you can certainly get a hold of me via our website, my email, or even my cellular phone is on there. And I'm happy to find ways to work together to collaborate, as well as to promote the International Year of the Millets. So with that, I'll wrap up. I'm not sure, Tarun, how we did on time. I think we're good, but it's just really been a pleasure to be with you and to share some of our thoughts and what Sorghum United is up to. Again, check out our website. Feel free to print off those posters. They are downloadable as a PDF. And by the way, we're looking for folks who can help us to translate those into other languages as well. So if you're able to go through those posters and offer a translation in a dialect, you can send me that document and you'll get it filled in and sent back to you. So with that, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to be with you, and I'm looking forward to finding new ways to work together in the future.
Yeah, thank you, Jim, for your nice presentation and overview of whole millets or particularly the sorghum. And it's been a wonderful pleasure for us to listen to you. And yeah, we have viewers, but due to time difference, some are in the very late night, so they can't access it right now. But anyway, we will broadcast it through your website and through ours. So if any collaboration, if anyone anyone wants to have with you, they will directly contact with you with this address or email or something. Yeah.
Great.
So yeah, yeah, yeah.
I,
Tell me.
I was just going to say that's great. We're always happy to work with people around the world.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Okay,
just
okay. Let's.
thanks to people.
Yeah, as you discussed, the sorghum mainly from the United States, it is exporting to China around 80 to 90%, as I think 93% you told us.
Yep, 93% of the U.S. sorghum goes to China.
So, so it
And
means yeah, it means only 7% of that particular production in the US is consuming in the US, I guess.
I'm sorry, one more time. I didn't hear you.
I mean, only 7% of the total sorghum production is consumed in the US itself. It's like that.
Correct, and it's commonly used as animal feed or in ethanol. We are
Okay.
seeing more. We are seeing more and more products on the grocery store shelves using sorghum, but it's been slow to develop. We're actually, this is one thing I should mention to your if you go to eventbrite.com and just search for Nebraska sorghum, we're actually
Mhm.
having a second annual global processing and investment summit. And we would encourage entrepreneurs who would like to access the US market to participate in that. Ideally, if they can come over to Nebraska in person, the event's in March 22nd through the 24th. And we'll have them meet with economic developers, investors, and farmers. And they'll have an opportunity also to pitch their business to investors. So if they're looking at accessing the U.S. market, this is a way we can help to plug them in with the right people to do so. The event is free to attend, but attendees do have to take care of their own accommodations and travel. There will be a virtual option to present as well, and that's fine. But you'll if you're not here in person, you'll miss out on a lot of the opportunities to network and to meet with people.
Yeah.
So we highly encourage in person if possible. But again, go to eventbrite.com, search for Nebraska sorghum. You'll see it's the North American Global Sorghum Processing and Investment Summit.
What are the major challenges? As you said, it has, lots of benefit, particularly with the health, in all the aspect of nutrition, dietary fibers, it is very much high as compared to, other crops which are basically used nowadays, like wheat and rice. It's common kind of. So what are the major challenges? Is that the sorghum product or sorghum itself has some digestion problem when we take it needs some more heat or kind of system inside so that it gets digestible and all the nutrients get excreted from it and then absorbed from our body, or what is the problem in that people are not getting it as much as they want or they can.
Well, it's a good question, and let me start by saying there are different ways to process it. So it can be ground into a flour, and it's a gluten-free flour. So if you have an all-purpose flour blend, they use xanthan gum in it to replace the gluten as a binder. But otherwise, we use it just like wheat flour. It can be popped, like makes like a little popcorn, little tiny
Yeah,
pop. Or it can just be boiled and used as a supplement for rice. It's flavor neutral. At least white sorghum is flavor neutral. The darker you get, the uh, flavor profile can change a little bit. Can become maybe a little more bitter or a little more earthy. That's not necessarily a bad thing either. It just depends on the dish that you're making. But the biggest challenge to your question as to why there aren't more consumers using it is a simple lack of awareness. It's a lack of awareness. People don't know that it exists. I've been working in the industry for going on 5 years now, and the most common question I get when I say sorghum is, "What is sorghum?" So it's really incumbent upon people like us to go out and tell the story of sorghum and millets because the average consumer just doesn't know what they are. Now, when you look at the International Year of Millets, the comparison I make is back in 2013 when they had the International Year of Quinoa. And at least in North America, quinoa, of course, comes from South America. But in North America, prior to the International Year, nobody knew what quinoa was, let alone could they spell it. And now it's on just about every grocery store shelf. High-end restaurants use it, and we're seeing that kind of same development here with sorghum, which is why we're really pushing this international year and working with our partners at the United Nations, because that's the kind of thing it's going to take. The other thing to consider is just the predominance of other grains in most consumer products, right? Whether that's wheat, corn, or soy. Um, that's the marketplace is really saturated with those products. And so that's why, without driving consumer demand, you're not going to see as many businesses, trying to make products using the grain.
Yeah,
So it's a multifaceted problem, but it's one to which we have a solution. We just have to go out and tell our story.
yeah, yeah. So the real problem is one is awareness of the people for this particular millet kind of crop, and other one, as you said, that the products are not available in the market as such as much. You know, when I go to in the market, I need to see the product. If any new product is there, it should be highlighted to me so that I can see that product what it is has, and then I take it and then I make something and I eat, and then I say, okay, now this product I will eat throughout my life, like that. So the product I have not seen much in the market as compared to other products. So the products, the processing of that millet, particularly sorghum, in some kind of product where it can add value to that kind of nutrition or something like that. Like for example, most of the children, they don't like to drink milk. Okay, so a new product came in the market. It is a kind of brown powder form of, and it has some sweet or chocolate kind of flavor, and they add it in the milk. So now the children, love drinking milk. So this is kind of, when something is not eaten as such, consumers are not liking as such due to several reasons, we can add that in some other product in such form of bakery products, maybe biscuits and breads and other things, so that it can add value and not to directly consume as a raw product, but as a formulated product. So I think the research should be driven in awareness sector, in lots of new product development. For example, if some millet restaurant in only the title is millet restaurant, okay, so it prepare all like in the noodles or in some kind of product they add millet somewhere. So this is a kind of branding or marketing. So then the people will know. Or if your NGO has some kind of program where you can, okay, this is a kind of food truck, okay, and this food truck sell lots of other stuff, but we will introduce millet as a product. Okay, now let's see one kind of millet you can use in your product, and we will paint your whole truck, food truck, in a very fancy and nice way, and it has some only millet sorghum kind of pictures, so people only this is a food product. What you have said is about you also told about the byproduct, how we the people are utilizing it, the fiber kind of thing, the building material. So I think that is okay to utilize the byproduct, the waste, but I think more the farmers not growing this crop for the fiber. They are growing this crop for the food,
Right.
and the consumer like the food as a byproduct is okay. There is something else left, and we need to utilize it. Okay, that is a better way to utilize it as a global economy or the complete for the economical purpose. But I think like like the food street. So awareness should go in the food street. For example, in the food street, there are people who are really wants to eat food. They come there. Okay, so like the grocery store. So awareness should go there, not to their home or somewhere where people are not liking all this kind of stuff. I think it's a big, you can find a big chunk of people who are really wants to eat different products. So a new stall can be open in the food street just to, showcase, okay, these are the products and these you can take it and make it like this and that. So One thing is that the awareness, the other awareness is how you can uh, make it as a good product. Whether you will add some other in that, or as a, or alone you can make the product, or in other sense, what is the best cooking practice of sorghum in the home? You know, if I buy the sorghum seed, how I cook it, with what I mix. So the cooking process is one of the things where the people are lacking with this kind of. This is one of the traditional crop, very old crop, and why it is lacking now. It's because people want a easy cooking kind of method. They don't want to cook something hard. And the other one is, I think, the digestibility of millets is also a kind of problem. If you take, for example, if you take rice or if you take millet in the same amount, I think the digestion of these both are different inside the body, right? So how the rice get digested inside the body is a very simple. You can take rice and then eat it. You don't feel anything. I think with this millet there is some kind of because it is heavy in nutrition, in dietary fibers. Are you thinking in that? Do you have any reports on the digestibility of millet?
Well, yes. Let me unpack a little bit comments there. One, you're absolutely right that consumer education has to come around. How do you use it? How do you use it in the home? And we actually have done a lot of different cooking demonstrations. I will tell you, for example, the Nebraska State Fair every year, the Grain Sorghum Board, they make something like 6,000 cookies, chocolate chip cookies using sorghum flour, and they're incredibly popular. In fact, we used to make 4,000, and we've had to increase it over the last couple of years. That recipe that we used, by the way, child took that recipe for a project at the Iowa State Fair, and she took second place in the Iowa State Fair, which is the country's largest state fair, using that recipe. From a cooking standpoint, yeah, it's about 3 cups of water to 1 cup of grain sorghum. I'll tell you from my own experience eating it, and we eat sorghum pretty regularly at my house. I don't have any digestibility problems. In fact, it's higher in fiber even. So it actually is the health benefits coming from a higher fiber diet as well. So I don't know that I mean, of course, things digest differently. Of course they do. But we've not ever experienced any digestion problems eating
Okay.
sorghum, whether that's been whole grain or pearled grain. Now, the one thing I'll tell you is to decrease the cooking time, pearled grain is best. It cooks on the stove about 15, 20 minutes, just like rice. But if you still have that hull on it, the shell around it, that does increase your cooking time. And in that case, it's best to use a pressure cooker. Otherwise, you just have to boil it longer. So no, we're not seeing any digestion problems. And in fact, when you go back to the research that I shared from the Food for Health Center, actually they're showing that the contrary is actually true. That it's actually better for digestion and better for rebalancing that gut microbiome. There are several chefs who are starting to use more and more sorghum, um, particularly in hospital settings, because of the benefits for sorghum and millets for the patients there. There are some excellent companies around the world that are making great products, food products with sorghum. Bontasana in Italy is one that I like to lift up quite a bit. Monia Karama is our vice president at Sorghum United, and she actually makes a gluten-free sorghum pasta. And I've had it; it's delicious. It's fantastic. Also, one of your other keynote speakers, Joni Kindwall Moore. She's presented yet or when she will, but her company, Snacktivist Foods, they're using sorghum and millets that are sourced out of Nebraska for their pre-made baking mixes. And then we didn't talk about the drinks, but the widest use of sorghum in the world, I mentioned China buys 80% of the sorghum. What they primarily use it for is to make something called baijiu. And baijiu, if you're not familiar with it, is the most widely drank spirit in the world that most people have never heard of outside of China. It's a cultural touchstone, though. If you go to China to a formal dinner, they'll feed you shots of baijiu all night long.
Okay.
It's incredibly popular. amongst that population. Um, so there's a lot of different applications for it. It's just a question, really, again, of going out and doing consumer education, and just showing them that it is an option and how to use it. But we don't need to overcomplicate it either, because I mean, you know how to boil rice, but if you can boil rice, you can boil sorghum. And like I said, it's used in much the same way. I use it in soups. I use it as like a pilaf if I'm gonna make another dish and put it over it. It's incredibly versatile. And like I said, the white sorghum is in particular flavor neutral, so it's going to taste like whatever you make it taste like, similar to
Yeah.
grits or something like that.
Okay. So consumer awareness, as you said, and along with, I think, with products, because once the consumer get aware and they don't find any product in the market, uh, the awareness goes, goes far away from them. I mean, if I'm aware of something, okay, this program has something, so where I can find it. Do you also have linkage of different grocery stores or the online store with the farmers directly so that they can put their product in that online kind of system, and the thing is much easier for the consumers to buy?
Yeah, we're adding new things to our website, and that's a great recommendation. There is on the United Sorghum Checkoff website, there is a listing of different businesses that farmers can contact to try to sell
Yeah,
their grain.
yeah.
I don't know how up to date that is, but we on our page, on the Sorghum United page, we do have some links we've already added of businesses that are making products with sorghum. We're
Mhm.
looking to add more to that. I would also mention, by the way, if your viewers are interested in helping us to spread this vision, and to help develop the markets. As I mentioned, we are an NGO and we're supported by donations as well. So they can contact me if they'd like to become a partner in that way. Um, it's not just the entrepreneurs, by the way, who are making products with sorghum. Gerber, the baby food company here in the U.S., they're launching a new line of baby food with sorghum in it. There have been interest from places like Kellogg's or Pepsi and Coca-Cola and other large food companies using this, because the benefit to those large companies too is that they get to be able to tell their story. They can have climate smart labeling. They can help their customers understand that, hey, if you buy this, it's not only good for you, but you're helping the planet, right? It's all
Yeah,
about marketing and telling your story and understanding your customer base.
yeah, yeah,
So we are seeing more of that. This type of thing happens more slowly than we'd like.
yeah.
But I'll tell you, from when I came into this industry going on 5 years ago, it was almost impossible to find sorghum in it. Now, when I go to the grocery store, there are at least 3 or 4 different gluten-free flour brands that are using sorghum flour. Kind Bars is using it in granola bars.
Yeah.
My wife's Cheerios has sorghum in it. In Australia, Wheat Bix, if you're familiar with Wheat Bix, that's actually the most popular breakfast food there, and it's not made with wheat, it's sorghum. I've had some of that too. That's also good. So there is hope. We're seeing these things move. Like I said, just market development takes a little bit of time, especially the larger the
Yeah.
company, the more difficult it is to pivot to new products. But they are doing that.
Yeah, I
Getting
think
more traffic.
marketing, it need a smart marketing kind of approach where, for example, if in a grocery store, I can find a separate, section of millets only, and they have all the millet products from the flour to the chocolates to some kind of bars to drinks, all the millets, in one section, so the people will know, okay, these are the several products like the hemp and the cannabis. The hemp is taking a kind of, boom in the market itself in various kind of products. So like that, this crop should have kind of different marketing strategies. Where and one question is that how much the farmers are getting in terms of the input and output, if I say, for particularly this sorghum crop as compared to other crops, how much they are getting.
Yeah, so let's start with the input costs, first of all. Sorghum seed costs about $15 an acre to plant on average. That same acre of corn is going to cost about $300 to plant. So right away, you've got a huge decrease in your input costs. From a water standpoint, again, using a third of the water means that that's less, that's another bill you don't have as much of. And in particular, in many parts of the world, we're starting to see more and more water restrictions. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what's going on with my screen here. So there's again, a decrease in input cost. From a nitrogen standpoint, sorghum still uses the same amount of nitrogen as any other crop. About a pound per bushel is about what it to. But we're seeing more and more precision agriculture. Now, from a price standpoint, the price of sorghum is always based on US, it's always based on the price of corn. It doesn't trade individually. So sorghum is always either over or under corn. When China wasn't buying sorghum a few years ago from the US, that price plummeted. It was like $3 a bushel. The last couple of years in Nebraska, we've seen prices around $7, even $8 a bushel. Some of my farmers that are direct contracting with companies that make things like pet food and cat litter out of sorghum, they can get up to $13 a bushel. So it just depends on, finding the right customer. And that's why I say being more intentional with how we do agriculture, not just planting it to plant it, but finding out what variety does our customer need and in what quantity. That's the smarter way to do it. You always have some logistics costs, getting it from here to there. And that's why these regional processing hubs, I think, are going to be really, really important. When you look at the cost of transportation in particular, when you're talking about commodity markets, the farmers who are nearest to port are always going to get the premium for their grain, right? So when China's, paying $16 a bushel, which has happened in the past, the folks down in Texas, right there on the port, they're able to get that premium. But our folks in Nebraska, being 5 states away,
Yeah.
we're never going to get that premium from the commodity market, not the international markets, because we have to transport our product down there, right? And
Mhm.
so having these regional hubs where you've got a processor just down the road from the farmer, that creates a lot of opportunities not only for the farmer but also for the processor too.
So as you said that China is, and I have seen some data like Nigeria is growing uh, at the highest amount of this sorghum uh, in 2020, and then the US is the second one, which is about 10% of the total sorghum throughout the world. And most of the sorghum, as you said, it is exporting to China. So what China is doing with that sorghum? One thing you told me about the drink, they are making the drink, and what are the other products they are taking, and why they are not going there? I mean, as you said, it is not a tough kind of crop which can be grow in drought situation, and also it's not need any kind of more input, more specialized kind of input. So why they are not growing, even taking importing the sorghum from other countries? So can
Well,
you tell me
they
about
do, yeah, they
how?
do import from other countries. One of the biggest competitors to North American sorghum is actually Australia's. Australia grows a fair amount of sorghum. I was in Australia recently and visited some of their farms there. Um, it's a quality issue, as I understand it. The quality of the grain through the breeding processes and things like that we developed. Our private seed companies that have been able to
Yeah.
really make breed these highly sought after varieties. Waxy in particular is one of them that's huge. That's what they're getting here from the U.S. They don't just make Baijiu with it; also they use it for animal feed as well. But just for the record, they don't just get it from the U.S. It's just that the U.S. grows more than any. Typically, the biggest competitor would be Australia. Yeah.
Okay. And what about their health impact of this? I mean, is there any study where they can find some kind of the country which are consuming this millets in a larger amount, or particularly the region? What about their health benefit as compared to others? who are not using it often.
Yeah, that would be a really interesting study. In particular, well, there'd be a lot of variables you'd have to check too. I mean, that'd be
Yeah, yeah,
difficult. But I really lift up our friends in India because India gets it, right? There's a lot of sorghum and millets in the diet.
yeah, yeah,
Um, what does that mean for the human health of the population? I don't know because there's one. I don't think that study's been done
yeah,
on a large scale. And then you've got all the other variables that would factor into that as
yeah,
well. I mean,
yeah,
every
yeah, yeah,
style to
yeah,
what we have seen, and I go back to Dr. Gallibrini's study in Rome, granted it was a small population size. I think they'd like to scale that up, but they were able to eliminate the variables when they did their human feeding trials, and they did see those benefits. So hard to quantify on a large scale, but it would be an interesting study to see in particular in India. I know Indonesia, by the way, now is also doubling
yeah,
down on sorghum.
yeah,
So it'd be interesting to see over time if you could isolate some of the variables, what that means for those populations.
yeah, yeah. And is there in the US itself, is there this nutritionist or doctor kind of they are recommending this to the patients? Have you seen that?
Yeah, actually, so where I live in Lincoln, Nebraska, we have one of the largest healthcare providers in the state. It's called Bryan Health, and Bryan has several hospitals and clinics around the state. But their head chef, Zim Khan, Zim uses sorghum and millets in their cafeterias, not just for the patients, but anybody who goes to eat there, they're getting sorghum and millets. And then a big part of that is because of the health benefits. So when we're talking about growing consumer markets, I think the things we need to think about in particular is how do we do that strategically? What populations do we need to get in front of? And the first population I would come to mind would be people who are obviously in a position where they're concerned about their health. So you're talking about healthcare. You're talking about influencing chefs that work in healthcare in particular,
Yeah,
and dietitians and nutritionists. But then also, it's easier, I think, to give people a new idea than just to try to change their minds on things, and that's also why we're doing the Sorgo Squad books and why they're going to be aimed at young families, because that's another population, young parents that are really, health is top of mind. They want to provide their children with healthy food. The next logical step would also be young consumers that are really driven by things like climate change and carbon
yeah,
sequestration, and that environmental story that we can tell. So those are the strategic areas that we're really hoping to focus on. And
and
obviously, we want to work with the big companies like the Kellogg's and the Pepsis of the world, but we also, again, want to work with entrepreneurs and help people find regional solutions that make sense for them
yeah,
to
yeah, yeah,
increase their economic prosperity too.
yeah. So yeah, so I think this year would be, it provide much changes with particularly the millets and sorghum, and it needs the awareness kind of strategies for different people, different kind of strategies. Like for the college students, you can have a different kind of strategy to attract them, what they are eating and what they are not eating, and how they are selecting their food. And for the older people who are more health conscious, and so what kind of strategies, it needs different strategies, I think, for the awareness sector. And the second one is the product development and its availability in the market itself, how it is more eye catching or kind of marketing strategies need to be done. And you told about that you are launching some kind of book of the native name of that particular sorghum. So I recommend that if possible, the book should be printed in the fiber of sorghum. The
Oh
fiber
yeah.
coming from the sorghum can convert it into a paper. That is not a tough task, and it gets printed. So it is like you are marketing yourself like, okay, the paper can become from the sorghum itself.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. The question is finding a printer that will do that for us.
Yeah,
But yeah, no, absolutely, and we have time to work those out. Our illustrator, the books are written. Our illustrator is working on them now, and like I said, the beginning of June we should have those available.
yeah,
And we can do some of that research. That's a great idea. I love it. Absolutely
yeah,
love it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, yeah, we have one more. I think he has gone. We have one more speaker now. I will check it if he is available. Like you said that the millets are not recognized, or the awareness is a problem like that. Conference conference also we have seen
Yeah.
that people are not aware. Only the people who are into it, they are likely to come, but those who are not into it, they are not aware about what is millet. Actually, this millet I have seen in India, like mostly the traditional people, the village people, they are using this millet very much. They are growing, they are eating, and as you said that the growing is not tough, so they are growing very easily, and then they are consuming it for their animals, livestock, and for them also. But as you come to the city kind of system, people are not much aware about. They don't want to cook that kind of particular millet in their home. Yeah, they can eat or they can drink if some product of millets available, but they are not likely to because of their lifestyle. They have a fast lifestyle. They want to just eat something and go to the office and other things. So, but they are more health conscious. If I say, they want their health to be very particularly. So, if your NGO touch that health, only health.
Mhm.
So that particular point is very much after this COVID, people are more much of aware about their health, concern about their health. So I think that is much more sensitive kind of thing.
You know, there's something really pertinent when we talk about markets development here, and the reason I started off that presentation talking about David Fairchild because at the time when David Fairchild was bringing plants not native to North America to transform agriculture here. At the time, people were really just growing wheat and barley and corn. That was about it, right? And so the producer didn't know how to grow these other crops, and the consumer didn't know what they were, right? But because of David's passion and his spending his life work on this, now we have a very diverse palette and diverse agriculture in the United States. So if he could do it 100 years ago with a multitude of crops, everything from mangoes to avocados, right? If he could have done that 100 years ago, then there's certainly we can do that for sorghum and millets today.
Yes.
Much easier for us to do this today because I mean, here, what are we doing? We're having a conference virtually that people around the world are going to be able to see. That's something that couldn't have been done 100 years ago.
Yeah, that
So,
this is a kind of awareness platform where people get aware, and if one get aware, it gets that number will increase. Yeah,
yep, exactly right. So that's it's a tough task. There's a challenge, absolutely. There's a lot of challenges in this work.
yeah,
Um, but I just always go back. I look at David Fairchild, one of my heroes. And say, hey man, if he can do it, I know we can too.
yeah, yeah. Or if I say if after 1 year this awareness get really in the mind in the people's mind, we can have some kind of millet store, particularly for the millet products, so that only the millets can come there, and all the products and all the flows, and people get millet card, millet discount. There are so many these this era is about is putting a term, a word. People are, really excited about on particularly a word or a sentence kind of thing. So, yeah, it needs a lot of awareness, the products and other things to really come this millet in the plate of every consumer.
Yeah. And for my part, I'm happy to give this presentation as many times as I can this year. So if there are other conferences or get people who are watching this,
Yeah,
maybe they say, hey, we're putting on this other conference too, whether it's Thoughtful Food or whoever, right?
yeah.
Um, I'm available. Just get a hold of me and we can do this again.
Oh, okay. In that way, we will have one more conference at the last of this year, maybe, to see
Okay.
how how much this this year of millet has played a role in kind of awareness and other stuff. So we will have particularly on the millets, and we will try to have all in particularly one time, so that we can join all together and discuss the impact of this year of millets on millets awareness, and challenges, how it can overcome it. Yeah.
Here's what I would tell you. When we studied the International Year of Quinoa, we wanted to know why were they so successful, right? But what did they do? And one thing that became very apparent very quickly was that the International Year is a great platform. Okay, think of it like a concert hall. The United Nations has given us the stage in the concert hall. Okay,
Yeah.
but it's up to us to organize the orchestra and to put on the show.
Yeah.
So we love the attention that comes for sorghum and millets through the International Year. But I'll tell you, if we're looking at this at the end of the year and saying, okay, well, how did we do? It's really going to be dependent upon people like you and I, right? And people like that
Yeah.
are watching this, taking that opportunity that the United Nations has given us and leveraging it in the most effective way. That's going to be up to us.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. So we will end this talk now, and we will wait for 10 minutes for another speaker who has joined, but he has left, I think, due to time constraint, as I said, the late night kind of system. So I will contact him once more, and if he is available, we will start in 10 minutes. And if you are available, you can join it. Yeah.
That's great. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
I'll
Yeah.
look forward
Thank you.
to the recording when you have it available too.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. I will share with you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.